Kaur, Research Assistant, Center for Land Warfare Studies. Your hostess for the National Conclave on Technological Sovereignty 2013. To start the proceedings, may I request Major General Dhruv Katoch, Director Clause, to kindly come forward and deliver the welcome address.
General Anil Jaith, Dr. Jaydeep Bhattacharya, distinguished officers from the Armed Forces of India and the Civil Services, respected veterans, representatives from the corporate sector, the media, and the strategic community, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed my proud privilege to welcome you all today to today's National Conclave on Technological Sovereignty 2013. This is an initiative which we took last year, in which the prime movers were Lieutenant General S.P. Kochhar, our former SONC, who's here with us today, and Dr. Jaydeep Bhattacharya. In this seminar, we intend to go beyond where we left off last year, and more of those details will be given to you by Dr. Bhattacharya in the theme address. The question I'm often asked is, why this focus by clause on technology and things like technological sovereignty? And the answer is simple. It is technology which will enable India to find her rightful place under the sun. And while India has tremendous capacity as far as human resource is concerned, policy and institutional deficits, and an inadequate industrial base for defense production remain stumbling blocks. What we need to do in policy and other terms will be discussed during the course of today's seminar, and hopefully we will in some manner be able to chart forward a road ahead. As Indians, or as India, we have great capacity in many fields of technology. We have been able to send a mission to the moon. We have been able, or now it's underway, a mission to Mars is underway. In many fields we have achieved great successes, especially as far as ISRO is concerned. But when we look at lower edge issues, when we look at something as elementary as a rifle, you find that countries like Singapore can produce a world-class rifle, yet we don't seem to be able to do so. Things like tanks. Why think tanks, guns? Why can't we produce world-class equipment the way we can? If we have the capacity to send satellites into space, then why do we lack capacity for other issues? I think there are a great many issues which we need to sort of in-house sort out as to if we can do great excellence in one sphere, why not in other spheres? There was a very simple example when we were discussing technology, and the issue came up about a very simple thing like car registration numbers, and the orders of the Supreme Court of India to say that okay, you will have a particular type of number plate by which the cars cannot be stolen, etc., etc. Now, when we go into such technologies, the question is, there are so many alternate technologies which are also available which are not being used of, like RIFD, which are much simpler. So I think it is not simply a question of doing one particular item or something. There are multiple things which we need to do as a country. And unless we get on board, the three prime people or groups, or one is the user, the second is the decision maker, both the politician and the bureaucrat, and the third is the corporate world. And I think all these three, their efforts need to be brought together, synergized, so that India can actually find a rightful place in the sun. In this inaugural address, in this inaugural session, we are very fortunate to have General Anil Jaith, who will be delivering the keynote address, and Dr. Jaydeep Bhattacharya, who will be delivering the theme address. Dr. Jaydeep Bhattacharya is a noted e-governance expert and president of Center for Digital Economy Policy Research. He is also the adjunct professor at IIT Delhi and is the founding partner of Catalyst Constellation LLP. He has earlier worked in senior roles in Accenture, IBM, Oracle, Sun Microsystems, and HP. He has numerous books and research papers to his credit in leading journals and conferences. He did his PhD from Department of Computer Science and Engineering, IIT Delhi, MBA from the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and the BTech in Electrical Engineering from the IIT, Kanpur. He has also been in the board of directors of FICCI and was an executive committee member of MAIT and was chair, co-chair of key committees in FICCI, and I'm chair. Anil Jaith, I think he's perhaps one of the most well-known figures as far as India is concerned today, especially after the horrific tragedy which took place in Uttarakhand, and that was the time he was heading the Central Army. And I think the image which came out very, very clearly on many TV images, and especially after that on the Facebook and on the internet, was of the general personally escorting a group of stranded victims and walking along with them and giving them that degree of comfort, and to tell them that the armed forces and the Indian nation was solidly with them. I think that one image spoke a million words. And the detailed biodata of the general is there. He's presently heading the Integrated Defense Staff. And that is an interim measure, I presume, till such time as we actually have the IDS in place. It is now my proud privilege, before I call upon General Jaith to deliver the keynote address, may I request Dr. Jayajit Bhattacharya to deliver the theme address. Jayajit.
Thank you, General Kaduch. Good morning, delegates. I'll basically be recapping what was discussed last year in the same conference and the rationale for having this conference. I'll take off from what General Kaduch was mentioning about India's attempt to go to Mars. It may be that it will succeed. It may be that the outcome may not be what we desire. But the success has been the fact that we thought of sending something to Mars. The ability to break through our thought process and decide to take a mission which may be fraught with risk. We've become a nation which is too risk averse when we see the writing on the wall and we still don't take steps to move towards what is an appropriate step. In that backdrop, I'll just recap what we discussed last year again. That if you look at a situation of a military requirement where neutralization of adversaries' strategic military capabilities is required, a traditional engagement would lead to this kind of a situation where the fallout leads to not just a military fallout, but a political fallout, a social fallout, and the ability to maintain law and order post that kind of an interaction, and the ability to maintain international relationships post that kind of an engagement becomes extremely challenging. We have seen another kind of response to such military requirements, which is in terms of cyber weapons. Where the fallout is severe fallout, but the identity of attacker is clearly not established. Where you can get the signaling system of an adversary down and therefore the trains go haywire. You can get the banking system down. You can get the supply chain down, so the petroleum and the oil and the energy requirements are hit. And therefore the conventional military itself cannot move because the back-end support system, the industrial might of the adversary has been affected. Now, is that a futuristic situation? Clearly it's not. We have seen the cyber weapons have arrived. And the best example is the attack, the cyber bombing of the nuclear centrifuge in Tehran. It has the same impact as the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where for a long time it was debated whether nuclear weapons exist, whether they are practical to be brought into the military engagement. And before anybody could react, it was there. Those who were investing on it became world powers. Those who were not investing in it became secondary powers in the global scheme of things. The other dimension to cyber weapons, unlike nuclear weapons, are pretty similar to nuclear weapons in that sense, is that you can't go to the global market and purchase them. We can go and buy the howitzers, we can buy guns, we can buy fighter planes, but you can't buy a cyber weapon. You can't buy a malware which is going to have a very specific impact. And did we have any of these fallouts? When the Tehran bombing happened, the cyber bombing happened, did we have any of these fallouts? We didn't. The military objective was achieved with very minimal social, political, diplomatic fallout. And therefore, if you go back to the complexity of cyber-enabled warfare, quoting from the Arthashastra, the cyber-enabled warfare has its origin from both external abetment as well as internal abetment. And the external abetment and both internal abetments are extremely asymmetric in nature. You can have a 14-year-old child unleashing attack, and we have seen multiple such examples, where large powers are not able to respond to this kind of an attack. And therefore, it will not be surprising to have a future military situation where a 14-year-old actually gets a Paramveer Chakra. And I've mixed up my slides and I was looking at what happened. So what I put in the other set of slides was a picture of a 14-year-old boy with a Paramveer Chakra award saying this boy was able to navigate his soldier bot and effectively decimate the enemy. And in the meantime, he also built these viruses which went and affected the back end of the military might of the enemy and had a disastrous impact and a devastating impact on the adversary. And therefore, this 14-year-old boy is being given the Paramveer Chakra. Now that might sound a little too far-fetched right now, but the point being communicated is that the conventional warfare is getting very rapidly relegated as a second line of attack. Now we have been talking about it for a long time. This is not a new concept. The point is, and the point of this conference is to figure out the steps so that we can move towards addressing that kind of a situation, where we have, instead of soldiers, bots going in, controlled by very well-trained, highly educated people in the back end, where communications, positioning, supply chain, warfare by other means, if I can paraphrase that, becomes very critical. Do we need, for example, the fastest missiles to attack an adversary whom we know is an adversary? When the forts are built, or where they used to be built in the former days, they were built against adversaries who were known to be adversaries. Therefore, 1 year, 2 years was spent in building up the forts. So instead of building up, or in addition to building up very fast and effective missiles, can we have slow-moving bots going through the sea, landing up in the port of the adversary, and just sitting there? You don't need the high-tech that's needed. It can sit there, powered by solar. It can take 30 days to travel because we're in no hurry. So the kind of warfare is very different, and the fact that we have adversaries right across the border and not 2,000 kilometers away, this is the situation for many of the other world powers, where their battlefields are 2,000 kilometers away, and therefore they need the fastest missiles, the most accurate missiles, and so on and so forth. We also need them, don't get me wrong. All I'm saying is that we need to think in addition to what already exists in the world market, because the battlefield situations are changing, the kind of adversarial engagement, the nature of those engagements are changing, damaging banking, damaging the way one transacts, damaging the ability to do a swift financial transaction, erasing the top level domain name of a adversarial country will all bring down the economy of the other country. Imagine if .in is removed from the ICANN servers, from the 13 servers that ICANN has, and the root servers, the .in is removed. The entire economy of this country will come down to its knees. So no matter how strong we have an army, will not be able to counter this kind of a situation. And in its wisdom, the Indian Army does have in its doctrine the ability to visualize future warfare situation, and based on that, understand what's the kind of equipment and infrastructure required, and the second part being what's the organization and structure that's required. If we need to have the kind of people as mentioned, a smart person who can handle bots and unleash warfare, that will not be supported with the current institutional structures, and therefore we need to have new organizations and new structures to be evolved, and these are pretty tall orders. And that's what we plan to focus in today's deliberation, which is what is the kind of institutional structure we can have so that we can leverage the industrial might of this country, the brain power of this country, the private sector of this country, and have the ability to create our own arms and armaments. And not just the conventional arms and armaments, but even the future arms and armaments, including the cyber arms and armaments, in a manner that is sustainable. Which is not that people come and go and they join one job today and leave and go to another job. The ability to have the domain knowledge in it. And just the technology domain knowledge obviously is not good enough. One needs to understand what is the military domain knowledge, which is where the ability to innovate and create such an institutional structure becomes quite critical, because it's not an easy task. It's absolutely non-trivial to put all of these resources together and enable them to function appropriately. And you can see warfare can be in all kinds of manners. It can be in terms of the positioning satellites, in terms of healthcare. Imagine all the NMRs affected by a virus. Airlines, financial industry, and industries that we can't even think of. Right now, these are some of the industries that we can think of which can be attacked by other kinds of warfare. There are many that we can't even think of. The ability to unleash social warfare using cyber techniques, which we have seen happening. We have seen that happening in Bangalore, where using MMS, a social warfare was unleashed. How do we counter such kinds of adversarial attacks? Traditionally, what was needed was a very robust industrial sector which would support the military. The army and the military were as strong as the strategic depth provided by the local industry, by the domestic industry. When we are moving to the next kind of warfare, do we have that kind of industrial base? Now, in some cases we do have. If you look at IT, we do have the skills. Are we leveraging those skills? Again, within IT, we still don't have very fundamental technologies in place. We don't have the database, we don't have the operating system, we don't have the networking technologies. We have them in pockets, but we don't have it in a manner which actually can be adopted by a critical institution such as the Indian military. And there are many issues which are stopping the industry, because these were covered last year. I'll skip them and move on. And therefore the issue is, can we do nanonization? And the term nanonization is something we coined, saying the need for a cheap car was an Indian need. The need for a car which runs on very little fuel was an Indian need. The need to have a car which can be very quickly manufactured were all Indian needs. There was not a need in US or Europe. And therefore it was only India which had to build it up. But India could build it up because we had the technology to build it up. We could not have built up a nano if we did not have the car technology. Would Mauritius be able to build it up? Will Sri Lanka be able to build up a nano? They won't be able to do it. So when we are looking at our own requirements, we should also have the ability to go ahead and execute it. So there are two parts to this entire puzzle that we see, and which we'll continue to deliberate for the rest of the day, is what is our typical requirements given our immediate adversarial situation and our military requirements, and second, how do we actually build it up and deliver it. A quick example being a design criteria for a India-specific processor may not be a smaller and faster processor. It may be a high temperature and dust-proof processor that is needed. So the requirements are significantly different when we look at our economy. Another example that we took up last year was the example of a mule. A lot of our military terrain is to look at the hilly regions, the mountains. US typically is a plain area, Europe is a plain area. Very little military engagement has happened on the hills. But we continue to have engagements on the hills. Most of our engagements are on hilly terrains. One of the best stud farms for mules is owned by the Indian Army. And once the mules grow old, they're killed. But why haven't we moved towards a mechanical mule? That was our requirement. And when we go back and we look at what US is doing, because they started engaging in Afghanistan, it appears that they have started working on a mule, and that's a picture of the prototype that they have come up with. But this was our requirement. If we had built it up, it would have had very significant civilian repercussions. The Hill people would have been extremely benefited by this kind of a device, but we'll end up importing these from US, and our civilian population and our economy will also bleed, because they would need this kind of a solution, and they will also import from other places. So what is required for industry to invest in new technologies? If industry had to create this, and this was a requirement given out to the industry needs an entire ecosystem to be developed. It is very difficult for industry to come in with a response to a point tender and say, I only build up my entire team for this point tender, and after that the team will get dismantled. That is a very difficult proposition. The industry needs support in having a roadmap. We need to know that after Mule version 1, what is Mule version 2, how many of them will be bought, and therefore will invest in plant and machinery and people and R&D. And hence very deep and significant investments are required. It's a high risk environment, not just in terms of the fact that the Indian military may turn around and reject all of that was developed, but also the fact that people keep moving. It's very difficult to put together a team. It's very difficult to develop the technology which does not exist, and so on and so forth. All these technologies are high-risk technologies, and absence of long-term partnership with the Indian military makes the Indian industry very jittery. And there are many cases of small industries, MSMEs, who have attempted to engage and provide solutions for the mighty Indian military. And after the first set of orders being bought, the second were never bought, and the team vanished, the production capability vanished, and therefore the technology vanished. And keep in mind what happens is when we say quote-unquote vanish, they don't really vanish. They move in to some other foreign vendor who picks up the technology, picks up the people, and starts selling it to other parts of the world, where our MSMEs don't have the ability to tap those markets. But because we have not bought from them, the technology vanishes. And therefore the challenge is involving all stakeholders: the Indian military, which needs faster, superior solutions; the domestic industry, which needs assured business; the global industry, and engaging them, because we still don't have all the technologies. When we say sovereignty, and you would have noticed we're not using the word indigenization. Sovereignty implies that when we need the technology and where we need the technology, we should be able to get it. So if you look at the cyber bombing of Tehran, it was not led by only one country. It was not the technology of one country. There are 3 identified countries who were involved. And therefore the lead country had technological sovereignty over the other 2 countries. And therefore they were able to direct the companies of those countries to cooperate and unleash the cyber weapon. And therefore we need to have very productive discussions with global industry and academia, where interesting research and development needs to happen. Our academia doesn't find out enough interesting things to do research on. They're funded by the public money, they're funded by the same taxpayer money, but the research, if at all there is any, is then published in foreign journals, where the first thing that they sign is that the copyright belongs to the foreign journal. And only then does the research get published. And the research is funded by our own money. Because we are not giving direction to the academia as to what are the areas where we really need research. And finally, the startups, who bring in huge amount of energy, who bring in a bubbling set of ideas, but they don't have the direction. They cannot have the domain knowledge that is built up over here. A general spending 30 years, 35 years, 40 years in the army will have the domain knowledge which a startup, a 22, 23-year-old kid will not have. But the kid will have very different ways of thinking, very different ways of using technology. The kid would need direction in terms of which area these startups, these technologies needs to be developed. And so once we do that, those are the ones which will give us the strategic advantage that we so look forward to. I'll jump down to a poem from Rabindranath Tagore, which says, "Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, into that heaven of freedom my father led my country away." The issue that we have is that we are not institutionalizing the process of creation of knowledge, both in terms of creating new technologies as well as procuring technologies. The ability to procure technologies is also complex, which is made more complex by the constraints of processes that we operate in. And when the person who has developed the domain knowledge has to move out from the procurement process that impacts the entire procurement process, that also impacts the vision that we look forward to. So thank you so much with that. I look forward to today's deliberations and your thought process and your contributions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my proud privilege to invite General Anil Chait to deliver the inaugural address. General Chait, in his formative years, has been associated with the Special Action Group, the Black Caps of the National Security Guards, which he helped raise. He was awarded the Vishal Seva Medal during his tenure with the force for rendering distinguished service in counter-terrorism operations. He has served with an infantry division as Colonel General Staff on the line of control during Operation Parakram. He has been involved in the career management of officers while working with the Military Secretary's branch of Army Headquarters and dealt with challenges of age extension. Subsequently, in the Perspective Planning Directorate, as Deputy Director General Strategy, he has been involved with the formulation of national and military strategy and policy. The General commanded an armoured regiment and an independent armoured brigade with distinction on the western borders and was involved in the conversion of an infantry brigade to an amphibious brigade, besides developing operational and organizational precepts of the future force, such as RAM-4. Displaying exemplary leadership, he brought glory to the Indian military and the nation by organizing the 4th edition of Military World Games successfully. This has to be contrasted with our own efforts which took place in Delhi in the Commonwealth Games. I think the media covered that very well. The General Officer commanded a strike corps and was Commandant Army War College. Later, the General Officer Commanding in Chief of the Central Command, he contributed immensely towards making the Army a relevant and ready component of land power. The General provided the ground leadership and coordinated the rescue and relief operations in Uttarakhand and under Operation Surya Hope, what I referred to earlier. And now he is the Chief of the Integrated Defence Staff since July 2013. General Anil Chait, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me here to be delivering the keynote address. And thank you very much, Jayajit, for putting the man-machine organization in the center of a 7-dimensional battlefield. And thank you for telling us that the lethality need not only be in physical domain, it could also be in the virtual domain, or it could be in the remote domain. And also thank you so very much for telling us as to how the convergence between defense and security is occurring, especially in the Indian subcontinent. And as to how the technology and its diffusion is enabling threats to be generated through a hybrid approach. And therefore the response which has to be created has to be on a menu which encompasses all options that are available so that a calibrated, proportionate response can be generated through so many other means than purely military. Having said that, I would like to devote my talk purely with regards to the technology and sovereignty in the Indian context. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be one. But having spent approximately 4 months into this field as the head of the Integrated Defence Staff, I just would like to share my views as to how I see the development and how I can be an agent for change. A 70-30 ratio between imports and export doesn't augur very well for a country like India. It also doesn't augur very well for a country which, as the newspapers say, is going to be investing approximately $100 billion in the next 15 years. It's not strange, therefore, that the Honorable Raksha Mantri has said that indigenization, self-reliance is key to success, and it is an issue of national security. And the surprising part is that it happens in the same country, and that's typical of our diversity, that on one hand we can put satellites, we can make satellites, we can use the launch vehicles to put the satellites up, we can make missiles, we can assist in making aircrafts, helicopters, and other high-end technology items, but we can't build small items which are required for the defense of the security related. So that's the strange paradox of the Indian diversity. The reasons as to why this has happened are very well known. Unfortunately, not very many people are here, and that's surprising because I, as a person, thought that anybody who looks at $80 to $100 billion investment, which seeks to generate adequate amount of not only wealth, but also employment, the attendance is going to be much larger. But that's an aside. Coming back to the issue as to why it has not happened is very well known. Relative isolation, protection which was available with regards to the model that was adopted, inability to absorb technology, and various other reasons, lack of infrastructure, different set of policies, non-availability of level playing fields are all there, they are all very well documented and we all read about it. So therefore, the reasons of this are well known, but the desire that we need to be self-reliant in the age of globalization, which is a different model altogether. Self-reliant in an age of globalization, we need to look at as to what we are going to do about it. Let me take one by one the various steps. First of all, the new document, that is the DPCR, is already being put up. Whether it is adequate or it is inadequate to meet the industry's requirement is a separate issue. But I think it's a very good beginning which has been made. At least we have been able to put across as to what is that technology, or what are those strands of technology that are needed to be brought inside, which are going to be related to the products that the Indian military would need. It's a different matter that we may not be able to give you the exact numbers. It's a different matter that we may not be able to say that whether we will be able to do it immediately or a little later in the mid-time or middle terms or long terms. But I'm very certain, and what I want to ensure all the people who are present over here, that we are cognizant of this fact, that the industry, whether it is a public sector or a private sector, they both need identification of the technologies which is likely to be brought inside so that it can help in categorization of the product. Unless that industry comes inside, product in its various hues are available, we will not be able to categorize. And if we are not able to categorize a product for the defense, then why would industry invest in it? Why would industry invest in it? So therefore, as far as the TPCR is concerned, and the slippages which are likely to occur as an offshoot of reduced availability of money, and this is a known fact because I'm not going to be talking something which is classified. You all are available, you all are fully aware as to what are the slippages in the defense allocation in the first 2 years, or what is going to be happening in the next 5 years. If you take this as a model, or look at as to what is the guidance which is available from the Ministry of Finance or the Finance Commission, you will be able to understand there are going to be slippages as far as investment in this $80 to $100 billion creation that we are talking about. And therefore, for somebody who's wanting to be competitive, a private industry, he needs to have more clarity and focus as to what would be the interest of the end user. I'm hopeful that in due course of time, having become cognizant of this fact, we should be able to initiate some steps with the approval of the government as to how we can bring a little more clarity, how we can bring a more understanding of the issue so that industry can concentrate based on the time zones that you have set for acquisition of a product, investment in technology. Now this is as far as the DPCR and its related issues are concerned. And I'm also very, very hopeful that in future or in times ahead, there will be a better version, much more, a version which informs, which gives little more details than what it presently does. I come on to the second issue of this categorization of the product, because that is exactly what the industry is keen to know about. When we look at from 2002 onwards, when the major change in the defense production, BBP started to occur. Prior to that, you had a document. We had buy and make, TOD and make. It started to change with the changes that were occurring with regards to the reforms that were sought to be introduced into the system, and you started to see revisions in the procurement process, which manifested in the form of BBP 2002, 2003, 2005, 6, 8, 11, probably now 13. And the scope towards indigenization started to change. And now you have a different precedence to be applied as far as make products are concerned. And we have to convince ourselves as the implementer of that policy that the thrust is towards self-reliance or indigenization. So therefore, the categorization process has laid down, and it is rigorously being implemented. Now that's an assurance that I can give, because that is exactly what we do. Now here again there is a connectivity with the DPCR. As far as the acceptance or necessity of various products, whatever be the field, Army, Navy, Air Force, Security, Coast Guards, or for that matter, in the new fields, in the new domains that are going to be coming about, we are aware that large number of variants have been issued. But that's not what you all are looking at, the industry is looking at. Because that has already come about. It's too late. You are interested in knowing what would be the future variants that would be available. And if there is an inter-se prioritization based on the limited money that we have, and if we are able to say that these are going to be the core technology areas and that is shared with the industry, then industry is in a position, based on the prognosis of the requirement, invest in the technology to bring about the reliance that we are trying to see. Therefore, what is of interest and what is going to be watched by the industry is what are we going to be doing for the future. I'm also hopeful that there is going to be a certain amount of rationalization in our processes, which will enable much better coalescing of the end user with the industry. And when I say industry, I'm talking about both public as well as private sector, or the consortia or anything else that they intend to generate as a mixed hybrid bridged product to deal with the requirement. Let's move forward. Let's look at this issue of the self-reliance. Now, this whole idea of getting a product and fitting into an Indian system is something which technology is dictating what should be the tactics. You get a product, you see technology which is available, and you say, how do I use that technology? Is it servicing the doctrine? Is it servicing the strategy? Is it servicing the threat? Or is it servicing the tactics? The 3 T's, threat, tactics, and technology, and its convergence is a must. And it is a must, especially in the Indian context, because the Indian subcontinent and the threat and challenges are very, very different to what is available outside. So therefore, a product, technology, which is generating a pull, is not what is needed. What we are looking at is how would tactics or a doctrine would dictate technology to meet its requirement. And if that is the mantra that we need to follow, then we need to be certain as to what is going to be our concept, and thereafter look at technology to the concept to pull technology along. Hopefully, something would happen, but it will take a little time. And it will only happen provided we understand and we appreciate in our narrative and context. Most of us who are looking at all these issues, we tend to borrow the concepts, the narrative and the context in the Western world. They don't work in the Indian context. 2-3 times that I've come here and talked, I've always talked about the Indian context, Indian narrative. And if the Indian narrative and if the Indian context is different, then technology must support that. And not that we pick up the technology and say, how do we foster it into our concept? So the 3 keys are critical. Tactics must decide how technology must service its requirement. And if this is the case, then let's look at what are the options. Do we go for a soft option? Do we go for an option which says, let's look at transfer of technology? Is transfer of technology going to provide us the answer? Has it managed to provide the answer so far? Probably no. It hasn't succeeded. Will offsets, because the technology is not available, and if you're going to be buying an equipment on account of the inescapable need, and the offsets that are available as a byproduct, will it provide the answer? Probably the answer is somewhat yes. But does it meet the complete chain which makes the technology providing the self-reliance? It may help you in getting some kind of a technology which is different to the earlier case when we were getting a product. We were only getting a product and not even being certain that whether the upgrade of that product would be serviced by the agency that gave us the technology. In this case, by bringing in the technology, hopefully some kind of an advantage can accrue. And therefore, these are only soft options and do not provide the technology sovereignty that a nation seeks in the context of self-reliance. Therefore, we have to look at the hard option. And the hard option should include the complete chain, the complete process, which starts with research and design, development, manufacture, maintenance, the complete life cycle. And if it is only the full life cycle, process is examined and brought inside through the framework of self-reliance, then only we will succeed. Otherwise, the weakest link in the chain would determine the strength of this whole chain of self-reliance and individualization. Therefore, we have to look at holistically of this complete range, and that will only come provided we bring in the technology, we ensure that incentives are provided, and that we improve whether procedural issues, or we deal with the procedural issues, the functional issues, or the policy issues, to ensure that the industry starts to participate in it more cohesively along with the public sector. In the end, I would like to mention that the people who are dealing with this subject are acutely cognizant of the challenges that are faced by the industry. There is a growing realization that a country like ours, which wants to be a great power, is the second largest arms exporter in this day and age when the dollar is fluctuating. We need to look at indigenization. We need to look at sovereignty in the context of the globalized world and how the business models are working in the globalized world to ensure that we do not fall prey, we do not become a part of an alliance, and so that we can pursue a policy which the government has chosen, that of non-alignment, of being independent, or rather having the advantage not only with regards to an assured supply of a product, not only on account of the greater cost effectiveness which will accrue over the life cycle, not only because the wealth needs to be created inside, but also because the employment that this 100 billion so-called figure that keep getting talked about will generate to this great nation. And I can only say this, that the Indian military would contribute to this with its eyes wide open. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Major General Dhruv Katoj, Director Clause, to deliver the vote of thanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it simply remains for me to thank General Chaith for his very perceptive views in which he has given a clear roadmap on what we need to do to achieve some level of technological sovereignty. Now, I personally thought that the thought process which he gave in the convergence of tactics, technologies, and threats, I think that is the most relevant thing as far as we, amongst other inputs, I think that is very relevant as far as we in the armed forces are concerned. The address has set the tone for the deliberations which will follow in the next two sessions. Ultimately, in my view, we will have to look at making policies which are in consonance with national interest, and we would need the requisite organizations to deliver on those policies so that the nation gets what it so desperately needs. May I now request you all to give a very loud round of applause for General Anesh Chaith.